All right, this is our last lesson in this unit, 1.6. We're going to talk about what a bisector is, a midpoint, and a vertex on a diagram. And I just took these images straight off of the Delta Math assignment you're going to have, so you could get used to seeing the format and what their wording looks like. The first thing you need to know the definition of is a segment bisector. Okay, so segment meaning a line, piece of a line. Bisector, if you're going to bisect something, you're going to cut it in half. So it's going to split a line exactly in half or two equal pieces. Versus there's a midpoint. Think a middle. It's a point that's right in the middle of a line. So it's the exact middle of a segment. So a bisector is a segment doing the bisecting. A midpoint is a point that's in the middle of the line. Do you get the difference between the two? So like if I had a segment right here and I want to cut it in half, so let's say now this and this are equal. This would be my segment bisector because it is cutting this in half. I could even extend it through here. This is doing the cutting. A midpoint would be actually having a point in the middle saying, okay, these two segments on either side are equal. You get the difference? So a bisector is doing the cutting. A midpoint is just a point in the middle. Oh, directions. Say which of the following statements must be true based on the diagrams below. Select all that apply. And don't focus too much on the diagram being drawn to scale. Just look at the symbols. Okay, so our first thing that it says is that line YZ is a segment bisector. I think I'm going to zoom in so I can really look at one of these pictures at a time. Maybe not so much. Okay, YZ would be here to here. Is it a segment bisector? Does it cut a segment in two equal parts? Yeah, it does, because this is cutting line WX in half, because we have these two tick marks here. And then up here at point Z is also cutting WV in two equal parts because we have two tick marks here. So yeah, it is. Lesson learned, don't get cheap markers from Walmart. They're not very good. Okay, yeah, so it is. YZ is an angle bisector. Okay, this line, do you see anything about an angle? We don't even have angle markings in this picture where there's arcs. So an angle bisector would be actually cutting into an angle. No, that's not happening. Okay, the next one says that Y is the vertex of a pair of congruent angles in the diagram. Y is the vertex, so the point where two angles would be equal. No. For one, I don't even see equal angles or angle markings, but this angle is definitely a small angle. This is a big angle, so no, that's out. Y is the vertex of a right angle. Does this look like a 90 here? No. And again, it would tell us because it would have a little box to represent a 90. And then Z is the midpoint of a segment. Is point Z the middle of a segment? Yeah, it is. Because it's cutting it in two equal parts. And then obviously none of the above. None of the above is out. So it's those two. All right, let's try number 2. I don't see anything about angles again. So if you want to pause this one and try it, it is very similar to number 1. EG is a segment bisector. So is this segment cutting something into two equal parts? Yeah. DC is cut into two equal parts. This length and this length are equal. So that's a yes. EG is a perpendicular bisector. Is it making a 90 degree? No, it doesn't tell us. So that one's out. EG is an angle bisector. Again, nothing about angles. I don't see where it's cutting an angle in half. If they would have shown us, I kind of want to use a pencil so I can erase. If they would show us like this marking and this marking were equal, yeah, but you can tell they don't even look like it. And there's no markings, so we can't assume. So that's out. G is the vertex of a pair of congruent angles. So again, nothing about angles. I don't see anything being congruent. G is the vertex of a right angle. No. And then G is the midpoint of a segment. Is G in the middle of the segment? Yeah. Right smack dab between D and C. So again, we got those two. Okay, and then next page on number 3. We have a perpendicular bisector. A perpendicular bisector splits a line exactly in half and makes a right angle. So we're adding something to it. Yeah, it's a line that's going to cut something in half, but it also has to make a 90 for it to be considered one. Okay, so let's look at number 3. Line VW is a segment bisector. VW is a segment bisector. Is it a line that's cutting something into 2 equal parts? Yeah, it's cutting this line. So that's a yes. VW is a perpendicular bisector. Is this line making a 90 and cutting something in half? Yeah, right here. It's making a 90 with line US, so that's a yes. V is the vertex of a right angle. So my angle would be right there. Here's my 90. So that's a yes. V is at the vertex. W is the vertex of a right angle. No. V is the midpoint of a segment. Is this in the middle of a line? Yeah, US. And obviously not. None of the above. Okay, so you can pause and try number 4. Okay, there should have been 3 of them that you picked. FG is a segment bisector. I highlighted it here. It is cutting this segment into 2 pieces that are equal. It is also a perpendicular bisector because it makes a 90. And F is the vertex of a right angle. All right, last thing we need to talk about is an angle bisector. So if we're talking about bisecting something, now we're not talking about a line. We're going to say it cuts an angle exactly in half. So some kind of line that cuts an angle in half. So let's say if I had a 90 right here and I cut it in half, what must my angles be on either side here? Half a 90 would be 45 and 45. So this right here would be called my angle bisector. All right, so number 5. VX. I'm going to highlight it. Is a perpendicular bisector. Is it making a 90 somewhere? With this line? No. With this? No. I don't see a box. Next one, VX is an angle bisector. Is VX cutting an angle into 2 equal parts? Yeah, we know because we see these tick marks on the arcs there. So that is a yes. Change into checks instead of X's. B is the vertex of a pair of congruent angles. Is V at the vertex of these angles? Yeah. V is the vertex of a right angle? No. X is the vertex of a right angle? No. So it would be just those 2. All right, number 6 looks like a square to me, but again, we can't assume. We've got that PR is a perpendicular bisector. So again, if you want to pause and try this by yourself, you can. PR is a perpendicular bisector. Do you see it cutting something into a 90? No. PR is an angle bisector. Yeah, it's cutting this angle here at P into 2 equal parts. So that's a yeah. R is the vertex of a right angle, which is tricky. We want to assume yes, because if this is a 90 and these are equal, this is probably a 90, this is probably a 90, but we can't assume, so we're going to not check it. Don't assume if there's no symbol. P is the midpoint of a segment. What? P is in the middle of a segment. No. R is the midpoint of a segment. No. We're not talking about a midpoint here at all. So it's just that first one, that RP or PR is an angle bisector. All right, there's 2 more. Trying to pick some that are kind of different. All right, number 7. QS is a perpendicular bisector. So do you see it making a 90 and cutting something in half? No. Q is the vertex of a right angle. I don't see a 90 there. No. S is the vertex of a right angle. I don't see a 90 there, including S. No. Q is the midpoint of a segment in the diagram. I don't see Q even in the middle of a line. S is the midpoint of a segment. S is definitely not in the middle of line OP, so this is a none of the above. Okay, and then why don't you pause and do number 8. This one was kind of tricky, but it should be none of the above. It's telling me that these two angles here formed at U are not equal, not the same. And here at W, they're not either. So UW is definitely not a segment bisector. It's not cutting a segment. Could have maybe been an angle bisector, but it's not because they're not equal. W is the vertex for congruent angles. No, because they're not equal. U is not either. Let's see. W is not a right angle. U is not in the middle of a line. And W is not either. So none of the above. And that finishes our unit 1.